Might have to give me a minute to get this turned on and all that. But if you want to be opening your Bibles to the book of Revelation, we won't read a lot, but certainly you can look there and get an idea of what we'll be talking about. I think it's on. I'll just go in my pocket. All right, hopefully it'll work from there. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak again. I actually didn't come down here for that, but I'm certainly not going to turn it down either. So you guys are either fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective. This was actually my Devo for Wednesday night. At Colleyville, we try to keep the Devos to about 5 minutes because we want to have plenty of time for Bible class, and it's a quick thought. I kept it to 10 minutes. But now I don't have that restriction. So it could be 10, it could be 20, it could be more. I'm not sure. So we'll see how this goes. I was blessed to be able to look at the book of Revelation recently, start to finish, for the first time in quite a while. I looked over it some throughout the years, but the last time I had a full view of the book was probably when I was in Southwest around 2004. So it's been a while, and I was grateful for the opportunity to look again. This book has a lot of information. If you were to ask the so-called religious world what this book means, what it is discussing, what is going on, your answers would vary, but they would probably all center around the idea of a millennial reign of Christ, that for 1,000 years Christ will reign, and he will overcome Satan, and ultimately mankind will be brought to heaven. There are varying ideas of whether there will be a rapture either before or after this 1,000-year reign, whether or not there will be 7 years of tribulation before, after, or even in the middle of the 1,000-year reign. Apparently that varies a lot. There are many different ideas. Years ago, Kirk Cameron, who some of you might remember from the TV show he was in probably 30 years ago, was able to help fund and get the Left Behind book series turned into movies. I think there were 3, I'm not sure. I know there were at least 2 that I have seen at the school for the purpose of understanding where the world is coming from when they view this. That is, the denominational world. And if you watch the movies, they are quite entertaining and quite informative of what the world thinks. But none of it appears in this book. It is fanciful, it is great for Hollywood, lots of special effects, but that is not what this book is talking about. That is not God's purpose, and it basically diminishes what the book is talking about. The book is fantastic, and it is splendid in what it is telling us, but it is not the fanciful idea that mankind has come up with. In reality, if you want to get at the heart of what premillennialism is, and that's not my lesson, but I want to get this out of the way, premillennialism depends on the idea that God originally sent Jesus with the idea to set up a physical kingdom, but did not anticipate the rejection of the Jews, and therefore the church was an afterthought that was set up until such time that God could come back and establish his kingdom for a time before his final fulfillment to bring the faithful to heaven. If you read between the lines of what they're saying there, they are saying God failed. Do you serve a God who failed? Is a God who is supposedly all-knowing, all-loving, all-benevolent, can anticipate anything? Is he worthy of anyone's worship if he can fail so spectacularly? And how would he be able to make sure to not fail again during 1,000-year reign if he failed the first time? In reality, when Pilate talked to Jesus, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it was, then would my servants fight to deliver me. I didn't come to set up a physical kingdom. I came to set up a spiritual kingdom." And the other thing to consider when looking at the book of Revelation, something that most of the world misses when they look at this book, and perhaps one of the most important verses to get right in order to get the rest of it right. When John writes, he says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, starting in verse 1 of the book, which God gave to him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. Not at some later time, far into the future, who knows how long, it'll be beneficial to you later. Show to his servants, to signify. Even the very word revelation comes from apocalypsis in the Greek, meaning to reveal. God was revealing something. Put yourself in the shoes of a Christian in the first century. You are part of a new religion that most of the world doesn't understand. The Roman Empire is polytheistic. Any god is fine as long as he's willing to be part of our pantheon of gods. The more the merrier, as long as they can all fit in together. The very idea of a monotheistic God was a problem to them. They tolerated the monotheism of the Jews. That is, one God. Christianity also said there is one God, the same God of the Jews, except, as we know from Deuteronomy 18 and other passages, foretold the coming of the Christ and of this new covenant. The Jews rejected that by and large, but it was not heaven's failure, it was heaven's plan to bring about the church. And so he's saying, you guys are going through persecution, both of the Romans who don't understand your religion at all, think you're just some extension of the Jews, later to find out they're not, and the Jews who reject you because they don't accept the very Christ that they were supposed to be looking for. What benefit is it to you suffering persecution for something that may happen 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years later? What benefit is it to you when you're a Jew who has been ostracized and kicked out by your own family and your fellow countrymen who say, we don't want no part of you, not allowed in the temple, not that you're there to worship at the temple anymore, but to teach other people, to help your fellow Jews that you care about, to lead them to Christ? Or economic hardships because later the Roman Empire confiscated lands, took away jobs, took political figures and said, you're booted from office because you hold this view. And many other things happened. We know Christians were fed to lions. We know they were used as lamplights in Rome, burned to death so that others could have light at night. That was the value of a life. What benefit is it to you to hear of a thing that will happen thousands of years from now? Is that the God that we serve? Or is it a God who says, let me show you heaven's perspective of the future. Let me show you what the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God has already planned and decided will occur shortly, as well as to see the ultimate fulfillment in heaven. It's not that it was only to that time period. There are things that benefit us today and mean something to us today of the final judgment and of being in heaven, but the primary fulfillment was for them at that time. It says, let me show you what heaven says will happen. So when you're wondering, is this worth it? Have I chosen well, or should I go back to what I once was? Let me show you. In fact, the entire book of Hebrews is saying to Hebrew Christians, stop defecting from Christ and going back to the law of Moses. The law of Moses was to point you to Christ, and the law of Moses is inferior to the law of Christ. Not that it had no value, but that it was determined to last for a short time. And so as we look in chapter 1, we have an introduction speaking to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, which would be kind of modern Turkey and other such areas north of Palestine. I have a message for each of you. So he gives a short letter to all 7 of those congregations. That's not to say that those were the only congregations in the world, but that's where a lot of them were, especially those who were Gentiles who didn't grow up with the law of Moses, knowing that the Messiah would come. This would be especially beneficial to say this is what's coming. But also to the Jews, we see some of the very symbols that God uses to describe heaven's perspective and what's truly going on are seen in the book of Ezekiel, so that the Jews among them would go, oh, I know this symbol. I've studied this symbol from the writings of Ezekiel and other places. I get the message, and they could explain that to their Gentile brethren. So in chapters 2 and 3, he goes through, and to some churches he says, you have done well keep it up. And he has nothing bad to say about him. To others he says, you are doing some good, but you have left these other matters undone. You need to address this or you will lose out. To others he had little if anything good to say and say, you need to light yourselves on fire. Not physically, of course, but spiritually be on fire again. Be zealous for the Lord. Go after it. To what end? Why say it at all and then get to all these symbols? Which is another question for those who would say, well, it's some fanciful thing of the future. Well, why would he write to these churches using symbols from their various places? In one place he says, you are lukewarm. Well, if you studied that city, you knew that nearby was another city with very cold waters, very pleasant to drink. And in another city nearby, there were hot springs that are very enjoyable to bathe in and so forth. Both cities well known for those. And some of that water was filtered to this third city. But by the time it got to that third city, it was lukewarm and almost undrinkable. And saying that's what you're like to God. You are undrinkable. It's hard to be around you. Don't be that way. Make a choice. Are you hot or are you cold? Make a choice. What value is it to talk to those churches saying you need to change something and then to give all these fanciful symbols of thousands of years from now? Doesn't it make more sense to say you have something to change and let me explain to you why that matters? I submit that in chapters 4 through 22 he's saying here's why I'm telling you this. Here's what's coming. Here's why you should remain faithful. Here's why it all matters in the grand scheme of things. In chapter 4, we have a beautiful chapter describing the throne room of God. You can go see all the most ornamental, amazing places in the world that you want to see. But imagine, even if it's just a symbol, if it's not seeing the physical throne of God, just to see imagery representing the throne room of God, as John did, to see that. Wouldn't that be amazing? Therein are 24 elders that I would submit to you as symbols of both the Old and New Testament, those who come before God to worship him. We see often that they have crowns, and they cast their crowns before the throne at various points and glorify God, recognizing any authority or any victory they have is only because God is first given to them. And then we see 4 beasts, and these 4 beasts have 4 faces. This is seen in the book of Ezekiel when it describes the idea of God's seat traveling about through Jerusalem, ready to punish those who had disobeyed. We see those 4 beasts holding it up, faces of a man, of a lion, a bear, and an eagle, I believe, or actually a calf instead of a bear. These 4 faces showing perhaps attributes of God, taking him where he wills. And then above the throne, we see this rainbow. Well, what is a rainbow to us today? The world has a distorted view, has corrupted it, but from heaven's view it was, I will no longer flood the earth. But what is it even more than that? It's a symbol of a reminder. It is something that stands out to say this is a contractual agreement. This is something to be understood that way. And I submit to you, it represents the mercy of God. We have a just God who will punish wickedness. But if there was no mercy, that would be a scary God to face, because every person who sinned would only face destruction. If our God was not merciful and gracious to us, then the most merciful and gracious thing that could ever exist would be for mankind to abort children, because that would be the only hope for any of mankind, is to never sin. That would be it. But God be thanked that he doesn't think that way or act that way. And instead, you have this symbol above his throne reminding him and reminding us, I am merciful. I don't want to destroy you. You are worthy of it, but that is not my desire for you. And it's beautiful that he says, this is how God sees you. God wants you to be here. God is acting on your behalf, both in justice against the wicked and in mercy towards those who are faithful and obey. Then you move on to chapters 5 and 6, and you have this idea of a 7-seal book. Well, what was a seal in that time period and for centuries afterward? What do we know of scrolls that were rolled up with a wax seal and an emblem in them? What do we think of when we watch movies and we see that? We think, oh, this must be some message from a king, and there's a messenger sent out to perhaps another king to tell him of an important matter or to offer a contract or a truce or whatever they may be offering. What would happen if somebody intercepted that who did not have the authority to do so and opened it and the king found out? That was dangerous. You did not touch it. You did not even break the seal, let alone read the contents, unless you were the intended recipient worthy to do so. And so in heaven it says, who is worthy to open the 7-seal book? Not just one seal, 7, a complete number, and something that should show us this is an authority figure. Whoever opens it has great authority to be able to open 7 seals and to read the contents. And John starts to mourn. Who is going to be found to open this book? Because this is obviously a message from God, and it's obviously important. And who is going to open it so mankind can know this important thing, whatever it is? And he is comforted. He says, don't worry. The Lamb is worthy to open it. And so then we have 4 seals open in succession. And with each one, there's a horseman upon a horse of a different color, white and black and red and pale. There are various ideas of what it might mean, whether the white horse represents Christ, the red horse being the dragon or Satan, or whether it refers to the power of Rome, of hardship from Romans killing others, of economic hardship with the blackness and so forth. But the idea is there's a certain amount of power and there's a certain amount of hardship, and it's coming to Christians. You will face this. And how can we be so sure? Because with the 5th seal opening, there are martyrs found. Below the throne of God, I believe, or the altar of God, I forget which one offhand. It says, there are the martyrs sitting there and saying, how long, Lord, O holy and true, how long until you avenge us against those who have harmed us? When are you going to act, God? And it's not an accusatory, how dare you wait, but how long until you come and you avenge us and show the world that what we were doing was right? How long until you punish those who would not turn? And then in chapter 6, a great earthquake. Even before I knew what the book of Revelation said, I remember the 6th seal because it was in a movie. They were talking about ghosts and so forth, and it's like, well, I remember the book of Revelation, and there was this great earthquake, and seals open. It's like, well, what if this is related? Well, Hollywood may say what it will, but the 6th seal is God saying, I'm going to act soon. It may not be on man's timetable, and you may not understand why it takes so much longer than you think, but God is rousing from his throne. He is ready to act on behalf of those who will suffer and have suffered for his cause. And then we see, as we get a little bit further, that there is a little book that John is to eat, and it's basically something that's sweet when it's eaten, but it's bitter afterwards. That there's something great about this, but first there's a bitterness to this. And he is, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Let me move back in my notes. First, we look in chapter 7. There's this idea of God's people being sealed. There are 4 angels ready to go through and destroy, and it says, before you release the angels and these winds, you need to seal those who are God's. And what does that mean for those of this time and our time? God knows his people. You may feel, am I good enough? Am I worthy enough? Will God love me? Will he notice me? I feel so small. Am I significant to God? And he says, you are significant to God, and you will not be overlooked. Not a single person will be missed. When God comes to punish, whether in a temporal sense or in the final sense, he's not going to overlook you. If you have been found faithful, you have nothing to worry about. There's no chance God's going to let you slip through the cracks, and you're going to go, well, I thought I was going to have my God's love for eternity. No, you will not be forgotten. But at the same time, if you're not among those who are sealed, watch out. And so once they're sealed, we have this idea of 7 trumpets to be blown. In chapters 8 and 9, 6 of those trumpets are blown, and we see various images, and we won't really go through them right now, but you see this idea of fiery hail that destroys a third of the crops. You see the idea of a mountain on fire cast into the sea, destroying much of the sea life and the ships and other things. And you realize this is a third, not the totality. This is not final destruction. This is not God sending Jesus in the clouds to destroy man. This is a temporary punishment upon those who are wicked. It is God saying, I'm going to avenge those who live for me. I'm going to take care of wickedness. He's taking care of something for that general time period, whether right after John wrote it or 100 years later. He's saying, there's a time period coming soon. God is going to act. So these trumpets are blown. Various parts of men are chastised. We see the idea of these locusts with faces of a man, hair of a woman, teeth of a lion, I believe it says. A terrifying sight, a scary sight. And we think of locusts and all the destruction they can cause when there's a swarm of them, and saying this is coming and punishment is coming upon those who are wicked. They think they're prospering. They are not. God is about to act. And it moves on. And then we get to chapters 10 and 11, and as we mentioned earlier, there's the idea of a little book. John, there's more to say. It's going to be hard to hear, but there is a silver lining. There is something beneficial at the end. This is worthy to be heard and considered. So don't get bogged down in the punishment and miss out on the beauty at the end. Hear all of it from heaven's perspective. And then at one point after that, John is told, you measure the temple. That is, he's seeing the scene of heaven. He's saying, you measure the temple there, but not the outer court. Well, in this sense, it's not saying, as they would have understood in the Old Testament, that the Jews were allowed in the inner court and Gentiles were only allowed in the outer court. Saying those who are of God's people, measure them in a symbolic way, but don't measure the nations who will not be part of this, who will not be allowed into God's temple. God, again, knows his own. And he has measured and he has made sure there is room enough for you and for all those who would remain faithful. Next, we see this idea of two witnesses. And the world seems to think that these are two literal men or prophets who are yet to come, and they're going to speak a message. And at one point, mankind is going to kill them, and they're going to lay them in the streets just to sit there and rot. And then the men are going to the people around them are going to rejoice. These men are dead. And then the men are going to rise up and call down fire from heaven. But in reality, what two witnesses do we see in the Bible? Do we not see an Old Testament and a New Testament that bear witness to the will of God and the mind of God? As saying mankind isn't going to like what God has to say in his Bible. And what do we see today as well as then? They don't want to hear it. And in their own minds, they're going to destroy it. In fact, I believe it was Rene Descartes in 1500s that thought by the time, so many years passes, or by the time I'm gone, the Bible will be no more. He's long gone. The Bible is not. They thought they would destroy it, but it says after 3 days, it comes back up and it brings down fire upon man. Not a literal fire, but a fire of mankind looking, going, God is condemning my wicked actions. I don't like this. It is something that preys upon our conscience or causes our conscience to feel bad and realize, I'm not living right. And I don't like this thing telling me I have to change. But it is still there, and it's still going to tell you, this is the mind of God, this is the will of God, and you need to change. From there, we move on to the seventh trumpet. And there's this idea of a woman about to bear a male child, and then comes the dragon. And we see from later verses the dragon is said to be Satan, so let's keep that in mind. It's not, it's some symbol, we don't know what it is. No, the Bible defines for us, it is Satan, coming after this woman, ready to devour her child as soon as the child is delivered. Now, there's various ideas of what it can mean. I would submit one likely meaning of this is perhaps of the Old Testament bringing forth the Messiah, prophesying this Messiah is coming, this male child is to come. And Satan wants to destroy that child, right? Does he not? Do we think Satan was so bogged down by his hatred of God that he would have missed an important detail that a prophet was coming all the way back in Deuteronomy 18? He was looking for him too. He was looking for the Messiah, and he wasn't going to miss Jesus. There was no way he was going to miss that. He knew. And he wanted to destroy the child and the woman. But we see, despite his efforts of, it says he collected a third of the stars in the sky to cast down at the woman and at the child, that he was thwarted in that. And later he tried to cause destruction to the woman as she was in the wilderness, and God caused the earth to open up and swallow the waters that Satan had cast forth. That no matter what his efforts, no matter how strong, how much power he had, he was not going to thwart the Christ, nor the church, nor the effort of God. And seeing that he couldn't stop that, he turns his attention to another effort. As we look in chapters 13 and 14, we see two beasts that appear. And it's very easy to go, well, let's see, there's a beast with, 7 heads and 10 horns and various crowns and ideas. And then we see a land beast that also has various heads and all this symbology, and we wonder, what does that mean? What fanciful thing is it talking about? Well, let's not get too bogged down that we miss the point of it all. If we look at the various emperors and so forth, it's telling us this sea beast is the empire of Rome. He couldn't come out and say, hey, Rome is about to be destroyed, God's going to take them down. Because what would Rome have done? They would have persecuted Christians. Whether or not they could destroy the church, it would have made it worse. So God uses symbols that Christians and those with the Jewish background would readily recognize, but that the Romans would not get. In other words, I'm not going to make life harder on you, but I am going to explain to you what's about to come to Rome. So here we have the sea beast, this great Roman Empire, seemingly without equal, unable to be conquered. And then you have this land beast, which would represent more of the political influence of Rome. Perhaps of other kings and nations that have bowed to Rome and say, you need to fall in line and follow after Rome, and saying, you need to worship the emperor. Because we know that happened after a time. They said, this emperor, he's not just a man. He is a god, every bit like Zeus and Hera and all these others that you falsely worship. You need to worship him too, as if he is deity. In fact, as far as you're concerned, he is deity. And if you won't worship him, then you're not going to be allowed to buy bread. It was almost like they had a card you had to carry around saying, yeah, did you punch your ticket? Did you worship the emperor today? Oh, well, I guess you don't get any food. That was a persecution. That was a hardship Christians were going to have to face. This land beast saying, this sea beast is a great power you need to worship. And God giving them that symbol saying, this beast is hard to overcome, but you need to overcome him anyway. Don't be fooled by what he is or seems to be. Moving on then a little bit later, as much of the world worships, we see this idea of 144,000 saints. We see the beast being overcome in the end. And the world says, or at least some denominations, there's only 144,000 people that will be in heaven. The rest will be annihilated. They won't exist anymore. God's only choosing a very tiny fraction of all of mankind. There may be 7 billion people on this earth today, and many more, perhaps trillions of people over the entire span of time that the earth exists, but only 144,000 are going to be saved, and the rest just will cease to exist. Let's not miss the point. That's not what it's saying. We have 12 tribes. We have the idea of 12,000. It's saying it is a large number. This is not some insignificant number. We look upon us today, 15, 20 of us here. Other congregations might have 300. Others I've seen with 5 or 6 people. Various sizes, and we say, well, what can we do? Doesn't matter. When you consider the church as a whole, there are many of us. We spoke this morning in class of the idea that those who are aborted have no sin and will be in heaven. Those who are miscarried and not born, those who die early before they are guilty of any sin, will be with God. That alone should give us hope that we're going to have a lot of people there with us. In addition to the fact that in the book of Revelation, in one place it speaks of basically 100 million angels, and another place the idea of 200 million angels. Now we don't know the exact number, and I don't think it's trying to tell us that, but it's saying the host of God is large. There are many. And so we have this idea of great many saints who have not bowed down to the beast, rejoicing, singing the song of Moses and the Lamb. Then you have this idea of when they're rejoicing, you have 7 angels with 7 last plagues to bring upon the Roman Empire. While the Roman Empire is declining, God's church is increasing. There's this overlap, both of bitter and sweet, that This evil force that seems like it'll never go away will soon not exist anymore. And what is the Roman Empire today but a memory at best? But where is the church? It has increased dramatically since its inception. And then we see in chapters 17 and 18 the fall of the Roman Empire. We see this idea of a harlot upon a beast drinking the blood of the martyred saints. Basically, someone living it up. I'm not sure what I'm touching or not. I might want to move this over a little bit. And she's sitting there and she's enjoying herself at the expense of others, seemingly unable to be touched by any cares of this life. Everyone bowing down to her will. She has all that she desires. But we eventually see that the very beast she's upon starts to devour her. And what happened to the Roman Empire? Internal forces caused them to start to collapse, and eventually what they would call the barbarians came from what we might call Russia today, came down, conquered them, split them up. It's no longer an empire. There might have been bits and pieces in various kingdoms, but the empire itself was destroyed. It may have taken a while, but this beast that no one thought could fall, falls. And all the nations that depended upon her, all the kings that said, boy, I'm so glad the Romans are here. Because of them, I get all this income from merchants or whatever it is I have to traffic, oftentimes slaves and so forth. They look and they mourn. They say, this was my great hope. This was my moneymaker. This was my power. This is my benefit in life. And where is it? While the saints mourned in the beginning, they are now rejoicing, singing that song of Moses and the Lamb. While Rome rejoiced in the beginning, their latter end is mourning. God turns the tables on wickedness and holds up those who are his own. And then we see the final chapters, 19 through 22, an unfolding of the bride of Christ, the church, and of the final judgment. Not that that has yet come, and not that I was trying to talk about them, but to say, this is what's coming for you and for future generations. The bride makes ready. We see this idea of New Jerusalem shortly after that. But before this beauty is described, we also have this idea of Jesus on a white horse with his army, as though to say, I need to defend my bride from all influences that would harm her. I need to put down the last of the enemies that have come against my people before my marriage can be consummated and I can enjoy the fellowship with my people for eternity. And so he goes out and he conquers. We see Satan is bound for a time, later to be cast into hell. Though he has power for a time, though we must be weary of him, or wary of him, he ultimately is going to be defeated, and he knows it. And so we have him cast out in hell. We have Jesus judging mankind. We see the idea of books open, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the book of life, all these books open, your life compared. Here's God's will. Here's your life. Where did you stand? Those who were faithful being brought into heaven. And we have this idea of the bride. We spoke of New Jerusalem, a beautiful scene. Not just of, here's what you get to experience in heaven, but here's how God views you as the church. 12 foundations with the names of the apostles. Not that they are so much better than us or anything like that, but because they labored and followed their God, they are held up and honored by God. And each foundation representing a different kind of beautiful stone, precious stone to them. We see walls that are tall, the length and the width being massive, so much so that if we were to take it literally, would probably cover the United States and go pretty much into outer space. It's not to say it's literal, it's to say the amount of space for God's people is not limited. You don't have to worry about, does God have enough space for you? All are counted. The walls are described as being over 200 feet thick. No outside influence is going to harm you, whether to tempt you or whether to take away what you have. You are completely protected. There's much gold in this city, precious. The gates are described as pearl, shining and beautiful. This scene is saying the place where you get to be is beautiful, but you yourself to God are beautiful. Not of your own righteousness, but because you submitted to God and said, I know
I am worthy of destruction, but I am willing to submit myself, to throw myself upon your altar, to ask your forgiveness, and to serve you and to love you, to help others. Saying those who do that are found worthy as a beautiful scene. We get finally to the end, chapters 21 and 22. We have the idea of the river flowing from the throne of God to the tree of life, that all are able to partake, to have eternal life. Not just life for a little bit longer, not just a life that sort of kind of is nice, but an abundant life there with all the redeemed of all ages, free from all temptations, free from every tear. I've wondered sometimes, what will heaven be like? We all wonder about that. What will it look like? What will we do for eternity? Will we be bored? Will there always be new things to do? How will it work? Well, if you consider how many children have been aborted in the United States alone, and you consider that estimates in the world put it at 1.5 billion, I think I read, and you consider throughout the ages all the innocent children who died, and all those who lived to old age faithful to the Lord, how many countless millions, billions of people will there be, and angels? I don't think we'll be bored, because you're going to have so much time on your hand to talk to people and get to know about them and get to have new friends and loved ones. It's going to take you an awful long time just to get to know everybody. And by the time you do that, you could circle back around to the first guy, and a lot of time has passed, and you can find out what else happened. Are you going to be bored there? I don't think so. We'll be praising and glorifying and holding up God and spending time in fellowship with one another. What is the book of Revelation? It is a beautiful picture, not something fantastic as Hollywood would see, but something far better than Hollywood could ever imagine. God saying, I have a plan. I did not fail. I will not fail. And neither will my people. The trials you endure, whether it's mental anguish, am I good enough? Whether it's loss of job, whether it's being burned to death, whether it's people ostracizing you on social media, whatever you may face, big or small, God's saying, it's worth it. Here is what heaven sees, and you can be a part of that. So as you come with me to the end of this lesson, you consider your own life, you say, am I good enough? Am I able to be faithful? You don't understand the challenges I have, Kevin. I don't. But God does. If you have a need, if you need help, please come as together we stand and as we sing.
Why do you wait, dear brother? Oh.